The eye of the drone hung in the summer air, a buzzing insect of judgment. It saw the perfectly manicured lawn, the white hydrangeas spilling from their terracotta pots, the guests in their pastel linens sipping champagne. It saw my son Mark beaming with pride from behind his control panel, live streaming this perfect fiction to the world. It saw my husband, Richard, his silver hair catching the golden light of the late afternoon, as he raised his glass. "To Alice," he began, and his voice, practiced and smooth from decades of closing deals in charming communities, rolled across the lawn. A hush fell over our friends and family, the dozens of people who believed they knew us, who believed they were celebrating a monument to love. 45 years. To my rock, my soulmate, the woman who made all of this possible. The words were a script he had memorized, a performance he had perfected. I stood beside him, the dutiful wife, a gentle, supportive smile painted on my face. The drone zoomed in, capturing the tableau for the hundreds watching on Facebook. The adoring husband, the loving wife, the perfect couple of Maple Creek, Minnesota. But I wasn't looking at him. I was watching his eyes. For a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, they flickered. They left me and found their true north. My sister Clara. She stood just to his right, a vision in emerald green that was too bright, too vibrant for a woman supposed to be in the background. She met his gaze, and in that fleeting connection, a decade of deceit passed between them. A whole universe of shared secrets, stolen nights, and whispered plans. Then, as if on cue, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm. It was a gesture meant to look like sisterly support for her brother-in-law. A shared moment of celebration for me. But I saw it for what it was. An act of possession. Her manicured fingers, the nails painted a deep, blood red, rested on the sleeve of his expensive suit. "Mine," the gesture said. The drone saw a perfect family portrait. A loving husband, a devoted wife, a supportive sister. Mark, my sweet, oblivious son, would later tell me how many likes and hearts the moment received online. The comments would pour in. Relationship goals. 45 years is amazing. Such a beautiful family. They were all applauding a mausoleum. I felt the smile on my face tighten, a mask threatening to crack. The applause washed over me, a meaningless sound like rain on a tin roof. All I could think, with a clarity that was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice in my heart, was a single silent vow. The two of you have been sleeping together for a decade, and today your world ends. The heat of the July day felt oppressive, suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming roses, a sweetness that turned my stomach. I moved through the crowd, a ghost at my own party. People stopped me, hugged me, congratulated me. Their words were a meaningless buzz. "You look so happy, Alice. Richard is a lucky man. What's your secret?" I would smile, nod, and offer some empty platitude. The secret, I wanted to scream, is a profound capacity for betrayal. The secret is that the woman you call my rock has been eroded from the inside out until nothing is left but a hollow shell. I watched Richard and Clara from across the lawn. They were careful. They never stood too close for too long. They spoke in the easy, familiar way of siblings-in-law, but I could now see the undercurrent, the invisible string that tied them together. A shared glance over the rim of a wine glass. A laugh that was just a little too intimate. The way he unconsciously angled his body toward her, even when talking to someone else. For 45 years I had been the center of his orbit. Now I saw I was just a dying sun, and he was being pulled into the gravity of a new star. Mark came over, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, can you believe it? We have over 500 people watching the live stream. People from all over the country." He hugged me tightly. "Everyone loves you and Dad." I hugged my son back, burying my face in his shoulder to hide the tears that threatened to fall. Not tears of sadness. Those had dried up months ago. These were tears of a terrible burning rage. He was a victim in this too. His perfect, online curated world was about to be obliterated, and I was the one holding the detonator. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But the alternative, to let them win, to let them continue to erase me, to let them steal my future after they had already stolen my past, was unthinkable. "That's wonderful, dear," I said, pulling away, forcing another smile. It's time for the cake. The cake was a three-tiered monstrosity of white frosting and delicate sugar flowers, another prop in our grand play. It sat on a table draped in white linen, a beacon of purity and celebration. As I picked up the silver cake knife, its weight felt familiar, comfortable. I had cut thousands of cakes in this house. Birthday cakes for my son, anniversary cakes for my parents, holiday cakes for our friends. Each slice had been an act of love, of service. This one would be an act of war. As the crowd gathered around, cameras and phones held aloft to capture the moment, Clara moved to my side. She leaned in close, her perfume, a cloying gardenia scent I now associated with deceit, enveloping me. Her voice was a low whisper, a silky thread of poison meant only for my ears. "You look tired, Alice." I froze, the knife hovering over the pristine surface of the cake. Her words were not an expression of concern. They were a diagnosis, a judgment, the opening salvo in a battle I hadn't known we were fighting until it was almost too late. "Maybe you should let me handle things from now on," she continued, her breath warm against my cheek. "You're not as sharp as you used to be." And then she did it. She patted my hand, the one holding the knife. It was a condescending, dismissive gesture, the way one might soothe a confused child or a senile old woman. On camera, to the hundreds of people watching, it would look like an act of sisterly affection. A younger sister, vibrant and capable, offering to help her frail, aging sibling. I knew exactly what it was. It was a test. For months this had been their strategy, a slow, insidious campaign of psychological warfare. The constant, subtle suggestions that my mind was failing. "Are you sure you remember to pay that bill, Alice? You've been so forgetful lately. Alice, you told that story yesterday. Don't you remember? Don't worry about the finances, sweetheart. They're complicated. Let me handle it." Richard's words, always delivered with a tone of loving concern. Clara's with a sharper, more impatient edge. They were building a narrative. Alice is losing her grip. Alice is incompetent. Alice can't be trusted with her own affairs. It was a foundation built of 1,000 tiny lies, 1,000 manipulative whispers, all designed to support the final crushing weight of their ultimate goal, to have me declared mentally unfit, to seize control of the inheritance my parents had left solely to me, and to live out their lives together free and wealthy, with me safely tucked away in a home forgotten. Her words, "You're not as sharp as you used to be," hung in the air between us. Sharp. It was the perfect word. They wanted me dull, blunted. They had been trying to grind down my edges for years, to make me soft and pliable. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for submission, my grief for confusion. They had no idea that their constant chipping away had not dulled me, but honed me. It had turned me from a butter knife into a razor. I looked down at her hand on mine. Her skin was smooth and unlined. Mine was the skin of a 68-year-old woman, a map of a life lived, a life of raising a son, running a household, and propping up a husband's ego. I thought of all the years I had supported her, my flighty younger sister, paid for her college when she dropped out twice, gave her the down payment for her first house, listened to her endless dramas with men, never once suspecting that the main drama was being staged with my own husband. I had been her rock too, and she had been tunneling underneath my foundation the entire time. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't flinch. I let her condescending pat linger for a moment, letting her believe she was winning. I slowly turned my head and met her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time I let her see. Not the weary, confused woman she wanted me to be, but the woman I had become. I held her gaze and I saw a flicker of surprise, of uncertainty, in her eyes before she masked it. She had expected weakness. She had not found it. I gave her the faintest, tightest of smiles. A smile that did not reach my eyes. A smile that felt like showing teeth. Then I turned my attention back to the cake. With a steady hand, I pressed the silver knife down. It slid through the layers of frosting and sponge with a clean, satisfying cut. I was not just cutting a cake. I was making the first incision. I was beginning the surgery that would cut the cancer of them out of my life, once and for all. The drone zoomed in, capturing the perfect slice, the perfect wife, the perfect celebration. The live stream audience would have no idea they were a witness to the final, quiet moments before a carefully constructed world was brought crashing down. They thought they were watching a love story. They were about to see an execution. My name is Alice Miller. And I am 68 years old. For 45 of those years, I wasn't truly a person. I was a collection of roles, each one defined by the needs of others. The supportive wife. The devoted sister. The ever-present, ever-giving matriarch. That was the masterpiece I was told I was painting. It took me nearly a lifetime to realize I wasn't the artist. I was merely the canvas, and the people I loved most were painting me into a corner, slowly making me disappear. My story with Richard began like a fairy tale, the kind they write books about. He was the ambitious architect with dreams bigger than our small town, and I was the art student with a scholarship to a prestigious school in the city. I remember the smell of turpentine and oil paints clinging to my clothes, the thrill of a blank canvas waiting for me. But Richard's dreams required a foundation, and my dreams, I was convinced, were a luxury we couldn't afford. So I packed away my brushes. I traded my scholarship for a secretarial job, and then another one in the evening so he could finish his degree without the burden of work. I told myself it was a temporary sacrifice. I would type his papers late into the night, my fingers aching, the smell of coffee and his ambition filling our tiny apartment. I'd watch him sleep, a blueprint clutched in his hand, and I felt a surge of pride. I wasn't just his wife. I was the silent partner, the wind beneath his wings. When my parents died, the tragedy was swift and brutal. It left my younger sister, Clara, adrift at 19. She was fragile, a wildflower in a storm, and I, her big sister, became her anchor. She moved in with us, her grief a heavy blanket in our small home. I promised her, whispering into her hair as she cried herself to sleep, that I would never let her feel alone. I would be her mother, her sister, her friend. I would be her rock. It was a promise I intended to keep for the rest of my life. Our first real break came from a tragedy. The inheritance from my parents wasn't vast, but it was enough. Richard saw an opportunity, a plot of land that everyone else overlooked. He had a vision, but the bank saw a risk. So, I took my inheritance, the last tangible piece of my parents, and I placed it in his hands. "Build your dream, Richard," I said. And he did. That first building became the cornerstone of Miller Development. He was praised for his vision, his courage, his business acumen. No one ever mentioned the quiet capital that made it all possible. I never asked for the credit. Seeing him succeed, seeing our life blossom, that was my reward. Or so I told myself. As Richard's empire grew, so did our family. Our son Mark was born, a bright, beautiful boy who became the center of my universe. And Clara was always there. She was a permanent fixture in our lives. A third parent to Mark, my shadow, my confidant. Her own life was a series of stumbles. A failed boutique financed by a loan from us that was never meant to be repaid. A disastrous catering business that ended with me in the kitchen for a week, fulfilling her abandoned orders to save her reputation. Each time I was there to catch her. I'd co-sign a new mortgage, smooth things over with an angry landlord and tell her, "It's just a learning experience, sweetie. You'll find your footing." Richard would sigh, call her flighty, but he'd sign the checks I put in front of him. I was the bridge between his pragmatism and her fragility. I was the family's great enabler, the great forgiver. I thought it was love. I thought I was holding us all together with the sheer force of my devotion. We built our dream house on Maple Creek Drive, a sprawling colonial with a garden I tended to myself. Every rose bush, every stone in the walkway was placed with my own hands. I hosted elaborate holiday dinners, charity fundraisers, and birthday parties that were the talk of the town. I created a perfect world inside those walls, a stage set for the perfect family. I decorated it with heirlooms, with my sacrifices, with a love so blinding it obscured the truth. I had given up my art, my inheritance, my very identity, to build a life for Richard and a safety net for Clara. I had, with my own loving hands, constructed the most beautiful, comfortable prison a woman could ever ask for. And for 45 years I never even saw the bars. That awareness didn't come like a lightning bolt. It was a slow creep, a gradual chilling of the air. It began in the silences. It thrived in the digital world my own son, Mark, had so carefully crafted for public consumption. If you scrolled through his Instagram feed, you'd believe my life was a golden-hued dream. There I am, smiling serenely beside Richard on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea in my hand. The caption reads, "Golden Years Family Goals True Love." Thousands of likes. Hundreds of comments from strangers telling us how inspiring we are. What the picture doesn't show is the silence that stretched for an hour before Mark asked us to pose. It doesn't capture the way Richard's hand felt limp and dutiful in mine, not loving. It doesn't show me going back inside alone to wash the glasses while he took a business call in the garden. Another photo: me, Richard, Clara, and Mark's family around the Thanksgiving table. We are all laughing, a perfect tableau of familial bliss. Bless grateful. The reality? Clara had made a joke at my expense, something about me forgetting the name of a distant cousin. "Oh, Alice, your memory is starting to get a little foggy, isn't it?" she'd said, with a tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Richard had chuckled along, a deep rumbling sound that used to make me feel safe, but now just felt like a tremor in the ground beneath me. Mark, ever the peacemaker, quickly changed the subject and snapped the photo, capturing a manufactured moment of joy that was a lie. I am smiling in that picture, but my heart felt like a stone in my chest. I was becoming a ghost in my own home. My presence was an interruption. I'd walk into the living room where Richard and Clara were huddled on the sofa, their heads close together, whispering. The moment my shadow fell across the doorway, they would pull apart. The conversation would snap shut. "What were you two talking about?" I'd ask, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, nothing, Alice. Just work," Richard would say, already turning his attention to the newspaper, his body language a closed door. "I was just getting Richard's advice on my finances," Clara would add, a little too quickly. "You know how hopeless I am with numbers." And I, the enabler, would nod and accept it. I would tell myself I was being paranoid. He's a busy man. She's always needed him to lean on. I would retreat to the kitchen, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the sudden, heavy silence they left behind. I was the audience member who had walked in on the actors backstage. They would quickly put their masks back on for me, but I had caught a glimpse of the real story, the one I wasn't a part of. The house, once my sanctuary, began to feel vast and empty. It was filled with beautiful things, but they offered no comfort. I was a curator in a museum of a life I no longer felt I was living. I was a background character, expertly framed out of the main shot. My opinions on business, on politics, on the news of the day were met with polite, dismissive smiles. They'd let me finish, and then Richard would turn to Clara and say, "Anyway," as we were saying, as if my contribution was nothing more than a brief commercial interruption. I was the matriarch, the queen of this castle, yet I held no power. I was just part of the scenery. The smiling, silver-haired woman who made sure the roast was never dry and the flowers were always fresh. I existed for their comfort, for their aesthetic, for the perfect family picture they presented to the world. But me, Alice, the woman who once dreamed of color and form, the woman who loved classic literature and debated philosophy in college, she had long since faded into the wallpaper. The discovery wasn't a clap of thunder. It was the pathetic, almost silent click of a lock I never knew existed finally giving way. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, unremarkable Tuesday that usually dissolves into the next. Richard had been in a frantic rush that morning, a flurry of misplaced keys and shouted questions about a file folder. He'd slammed the door, his car had roared to life, and then there was silence. The house settled back into its usual state of quiet oppression, a stillness that felt more like a held breath than peace. And there, on the polished mahogany of the hall table, lay his work tablet. He never left it. Ever. It was an extension of his arm, a sleek black rectangle that held more of his life than I ever did. I stared at it for a long time, the dust motes dancing in the sliver of sunlight from the window. My hand trembled as I reached for it. It felt like a transgression, a violation of the unspoken treaty that governed our life. I was not to look too closely. I was not to ask too many questions. I was to be the placid, smiling matriarch in the background of our family's perfect digital life. I pressed the home button. The screen flickered to life and with it a notification bubble. It was from his calendar. Simple, innocuous words that rearranged the entire world. Anniversary C&R 10 years. The appointment was for next Thursday. C&R. Clara and Richard. My sister and my husband. My breath caught in my chest, a sharp, painful thing. My blood went cold, a slush of ice moving through my veins. 10 years. A decade. An entire lifetime of moments, holidays, birthdays, and quiet evenings, all rendered a lie by 3 little letters on a screen. My fingers, clumsy and numb, found their way to the calendar app. I opened it. It wasn't just an anniversary reminder. It was an archive. A meticulously curated museum of their betrayal. Every week, a recurring appointment. Business lunch C. Every month, a weekend entry. Golf retreat. But the location notes were for a boutique hotel 2 states away, the same one Clara had gushed about after her spa weekend with friends. It wasn't just a calendar. It was a map of my own foolishness. I clicked on a date from last summer, the week I'd been sick with that terrible flu. The entry read, "Check on Alice 2 p.m. Below it, another entry. Coast House 4 p.m. C. I remembered that day. Clara had brought soup, her face a mask of sisterly concern. She'd patted my hand and said, "You just rest, Alice. Richard and I can handle everything." And they had. They had handled everything, and then they had driven to the coast. I swiped out of the calendar and my thumb hovered over his photo gallery. This was the precipice. I could stop here, armed with the sterile, damning evidence of dates and times. I could pretend I hadn't seen it, put the tablet back, and continue to slowly drown in the polite, suffocating atmosphere of my own home. Or I could jump. I jumped. The photos weren't even hidden. They were right there, in a folder labeled Projects. Pictures of them. So many pictures. Richard and Clara. Heads bent together over a bottle of wine at an outdoor cafe I'd never been to. Clara wearing a silk robe I recognized as one I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago. Laughing on a hotel balcony. The ocean sprawling behind her. A selfie of them, cheeks pressed together. Richard's arm slung around her shoulder. He was smiling. It wasn't his public smile, the tight, practiced one he used for family photos and business events. It was a real smile, a relaxed, unguarded expression of pure happiness I hadn't seen directed at me in 20 years. Then came the messages. A universe of whispered confidences and shared jokes at my expense. Clara. She almost found the credit card bill for the necklace. Had to tell her it was a surprise for Sarah. Richard. Good save. Her memory is so shot, she'll forget by tomorrow anyway. She asked me 3 times this morning if I'd fed the dog. We didn't have a dog. We hadn't had a dog in 5 years. I had asked him if he had taken his heart medication. Another thread. Clara. She's wearing that awful beige sweater again. She looks 100 years old. Richard. Let her. Makes her look more confused. It helps our case. Clara. You're terrible. Followed by a string of kissing emojis. They hadn't even bothered to be clever. The sheer arrogance of it was a separate, physical blow. They had built their secret world right under my nose, using the bricks of my own trust, my own love, my own manufactured obsolescence. I was the fool in a play where everyone but me knew the script. And with that knowledge, the past reconfigured itself. The last 10 years didn't just feel like a lie, they became a carefully constructed stage. Every strange comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment I had felt small or crazy, snapped into focus. It was a gaslighting symphony, and they had been conducting it for a decade. Alice, you're being paranoid. Clara and I are just close, you know that. She's your sister, for heaven's sake. Richard's voice, smooth and reasonable, echoing in my memory. It was after I'd questioned why he and Clara always took their coffee out to the porch, shutting the glass door behind them. I was being paranoid. Your memory isn't what it used to be, sweetie. His hand on my shoulder. A gesture that looked like affection but felt like a restraint. This was after I was certain I had paid the electricity bill, only for us to receive a late notice. He'd handled it, of course, shaking his head with a sad little smile, telling me not to worry my pretty little head about it anymore. I found the payment confirmation on the tablet. He had intercepted the first bill and hidden it. Sis, you seem so tired and forgetful lately. Maybe you should let me and Richard handle the family finances for a while, just to take the load off. Clara, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern, during a family dinner. I'd felt a prickle of indignation then, but I'd swallowed it down. She was just worried about me. Now, sitting in the suffocating silence with the tablet's cold light on my face, I saw their words not as moments of carelessness or concern, but as carefully sharpened weapons. They weren't just cheating. They were systematically dismantling me piece by piece, trying to convince me and everyone else that I was no longer a reliable narrator of my own life. They were trying to erase me. That evening, dinner was a masterclass in the art. Mark and his wife Sarah came over with my granddaughter Lily. The air was thick with the pretense of normalcy. I sat at the table, the tablet's secrets burning behind my eyes, and watched the performance. Richard sat at the head of the table as always. Clara, who had just dropped by, was seated to his right, in the place that used to be mine before my hips started acting up, and I was moved to a lower, less central chair at the corner. No one had asked if I wanted to move. It had just happened one day. "Pass the salad, Alice," Richard said, not looking at me, his attention fixed on something Clara was showing him on her phone. They shared a low laugh. I passed the heavy ceramic bowl down the table. My own plate was the same faded floral pattern I'd used for 30 years, but Sarah had brought out the newer, pristine white plates for everyone else. Last week, when I'd reached for one of the white plates, she'd gently taken it from my hand. "Let's use this one for you, Grandma. It's lighter. We don't want any accidents." My hands didn't even shake. Tonight my water was in a thick, clear plastic cup, the kind you give to a toddler. Everyone else had elegant, sweating glasses. "It's just easier, Mom," Mark had said last month when the plastic cups first appeared. "Less to worry about." Worry about what? Me? Or the inheritance I held? "Grandma, you gave Lily another cookie," Sarah said, her voice a saccharine blade. "We talked about her sugar intake, remember?" I hadn't given Lily a cookie. Clara had, with a wink, whispering, "Don't tell your mommy." But Lily, in the beautiful, brutal honesty of a 5-year-old, pointed at me. "Grandma did it." Clara just smiled, a tiny triumphant twitch of her lips, and Sarah shot me a look of pure exasperation. I said nothing. What was the point? My words had no currency here. They had been devalued over years of careful manipulation. I was just the confused old woman in the corner. After dinner, Richard turned on the television in the living room, flipping to a loud, violent action movie he knew I despised. He and Mark settled onto the couch. Clara sat in the armchair, tucking her feet under her. There was no room for me. I hovered in the doorway for a moment before turning to go to my room. "Leaving so soon, Alice?" Richard called out, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Don't want to see the end?" "I'm a little tired," I murmured. "Of course you are," he said, and it sounded like an indictment. I needed to know more. The tablet had shown me the what, the where, and the when. The gaslighting explained the how, but I didn't understand the why. The affair was one thing, a common sordid brand of betrayal, but the campaign to discredit my mind that felt different. It felt colder, calculated. An idea terrifying and sharp began to form. I had to listen. I had to hear them when they thought they were alone, when their masks were off. The next day I went into town. I told them I had a doctor's appointment. They didn't question it, they encouraged it. "Good, Alice," Richard had said. "Make sure you tell him about your forgetfulness." I didn't go to the doctor. I went to an electronics store. I bought the smallest, most powerful voice-activated recorder I could find. My hands were sweating as I paid in cash, the crisp bills feeling like contraband. Hiding it was the hardest part. My heart hammered against my ribs so loudly I was sure they would hear it from the next room. I chose the living room bookshelf. behind a thick leather-bound copy of Moby Dick that my father had given me, a book I knew neither Richard nor Clara had ever touched. I wedged the tiny black device into the dark space between the book and the back of the shelf. I practiced turning it on and off with my fingertips by feel alone, until I could do it without looking. Then I waited. It took 3 days. 3 days of acting the part of the slow, gentle, fading Alice. I forgot where I put my reading glasses. I asked Richard what day it was twice. I let my sentences trail off into nothing. I saw the satisfied, knowing looks exchanged between him and Clara over my head. They thought I was crumbling. They had no idea I was forging myself into steel. On the third evening, Mark and his family were gone, and the house was quiet. I feigned a headache and went to my room shortly after dinner, leaving them alone in the living room with the television murmuring. I left my bedroom door ajar listening. I heard the clink of glasses, their low conspiratorial laughter. After an hour I heard Clara leave. I waited another 30 minutes, until I was sure Richard was in his study. I slipped out of my room, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The house was dark, save for the sliver of light from under Richard's study door. In the living room the air was stale with their secrets. My hand, steady now, reached behind the book. I felt the small, cool rectangle of the recorder. My fingers found the switch and slid it to off. Back in my room I locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, the little device heavy in my palm. I plugged in the tiny earbuds and pressed play. For a few minutes there was just the muffled sound of the television. Then voices. Their voices. Unfiltered. "Got so tired of having to pretend," Clara was saying, her voice a low venomous hiss that bore no resemblance to her usual bright tone. "Having to look at her day in and day out. It's like living with a ghost." "Patience, see," Richard's voice smooth as bourbon. "We're almost there. I had a talk with Dr. Evans. Planted a few more seeds. Mentioned the time she got lost driving back from the grocery store. A lie. I had never been lost. I'd taken a detour to see the cherry blossoms." "And he bought it?" Clara asked. "Of course. I'm the worried, devoted husband. She's the fragile, confused wife. It's an easy sell. Her own son is starting to believe it. Did you see the way Mark looked at her tonight when she forgot his birthday was next week?" My blood ran cold. Mark's birthday wasn't next week. It was next month. Richard had deliberately told me the wrong date that morning, and I had, like a fool, repeated it. A test. One I had failed spectacularly. There was a pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then Clara spoke again, and her voice was stripped of all pretense. It was the voice of pure naked greed. "What about the trust, Richard? Are you sure about this? Her father made that thing ironclad. And there it was. The why." Richard let out a low chuckle. It was the ugliest sound I had ever heard. "It's ironclad as long as she's of sound mind. But the minute she is declared legally incapacitated, legally incompetent to manage her own affairs, control defaults to her spouse. Me. It's the only loophole. My inheritance. The money my father had left me. His final act of love and protection. It was never about me at all. I wasn't a person to them. I was an obstacle. A combination lock standing between them and a lifetime of wealth." "So we just keep going?" Clara asked. "The misplaced keys, the changing of passwords, the forgotten appointments?" "Exactly," Richard said. "It's death by 1,000 cuts. Her mind is already slipping, or at least that's the narrative we've created. We just need to give it a little push. A few more years, maybe less if we're lucky. And then everything she has becomes ours. A little push." I ripped the earbuds out, my breath coming in ragged, silent gasps. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively, patiently, methodically burying me alive. My role as wife, as sister, had been a sham for a decade. And now I knew what they wanted to replace it with. My role as a wealthy, mindless invalid whose signature would sign their future into being. I sat there in the dark, the recorder clutched in my hand, and felt the last vestiges of the woman I used to be. The trusting wife, the loving sister, the gentle mother, turned to ash. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure on my chest. But underneath it something else was stirring. A cold, hard ember of rage began to glow in the ruins. They thought my mind was slipping. They thought I was a ghost. They were about to find out how wrong they were. A ghost can't touch you, can't fight back. But I was not a ghost. I was the architect of the prison they had built for me, and I still had the master key. They had given me a little push. Now I was going to push back. And my push wouldn't be a gentle nudge. It would be a shove clean off a cliff. The spark didn't come from a place of anger, but from a place of pure, chilling clarity. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, carried on the enthusiastic voice of my son Mark. He'd come over, ostensibly to check on me, but really he was buzzing with an idea. His eyes alight with the kind of passion I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy with a new chemistry set. He paced the living room, the same room where I'd heard my life sentence pronounced in whispers, and he painted a picture of the future. It's going to be epic, Mom. The annual Miller family reunion, but bigger. Better. We've got relatives in Oregon, Florida. Even Aunt Carol's family in Germany now. They never get to be part of it. So I'm going to produce it. A full multi-camera live stream. High definition. We'll have interviews, little segments on the family history. I'm calling it Millerfest 2025. He beamed, so proud of his clever portmanteau. Richard, sitting in his worn leather armchair, chuckled condescendingly. Millerfest? Sounds like a beer commercial, son. Just point your phone at the grill and be done with it. Clara, perched on the arm of Richard's chair like a decorative vulture, chimed in with her syrupy voice. Oh, Richard, let the boy have his fun. Sweet. Maybe you can get a little shot of your grandmother snoozing in a corner, Mark. A little human interest piece. They laughed. A private, shared laugh that excluded Mark, excluded me, excluded the whole world. Mark's face fell, the light in his eyes dimming. He was used to their casual dismissals, the way they treated his ambitions as quaint little hobbies. He was their son, their nephew, but he was not one of them. He was one of mine. And in that moment, as I watched my son's dreams being patted on the head and sent to bed, the plan ignited. It wasn't a slow burn. It was a flash of lightning in a dead forest, illuminating every twisted branch. Millerfest 2025. A live stream. An audience. They wanted a show for the relatives in Germany? They wanted a performance? Oh, I would give them a masterpiece. I would give them a finale. A family history, Mark had said. Yes, I would finally tell the real story. I smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in months. It must have been unnerving, because Clara shifted uncomfortably. Are you feeling all right, Alice? You look flushed. I'm feeling wonderful, dear, I said, my voice smooth as polished marble. I think Mark's idea is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We should support him in any way we can. Richard grunted, already lost in his newspaper, the matter dismissed. But Mark looked at me, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He didn't see the ice forming behind my smile. He didn't see the theater I was already constructing in my mind, the stage being set, the lighting being adjusted for the final act. They had given me the stage, the audience, and the title. All I had to do was write the script. The first and most immediate wall I hit was made of paper. Green paper. Richard had spent decades building that wall, brick by meticulous brick. He called it managing our finances, but what it truly was a cage. Joint accounts that I could access, but that sent an alert to his phone for any withdrawal over $200. Investments held in his name, with me listed as a beneficiary, a ghost waiting for his death to have any claim. Deeds to our home, our vacation cabin, all requiring his signature. He hadn't just taken my life. He had monetized it and locked the profits in a vault only he could open. My revenge couldn't be funded by grocery money. This war required a treasury. There was only one thing he didn't control, one piece of my past he had deemed too sentimental, too feminine, to be of any real financial interest. My mother's paintings. A collection of 8 small, exquisite antique oil paintings of English landscapes. They had hung in the upstairs hallway for 40 years, so much a part of the house that he no longer saw them. To him, they were just part of the decor like the wallpaper or the crown molding. To me, they were my mother's last gift, her whispered reminder that I existed before him. Selling them felt like a betrayal on a level I could barely comprehend. It was like cutting off a limb to fashion a weapon. But what was the alternative? To remain caged, to let them win? My mother, a woman of formidable will, would have understood. She would have told me to burn the damn things if it meant my freedom. I couldn't do it locally. This town was a fishbowl. A trip to the local appraiser would be back to Richard's ears before I even got the valuation. I needed anonymity. I told Richard the first was going to visit my old college roommate Brenda in Philadelphia for a few days. He loved it when I saw Brenda. She was a mousy, unthreatening woman who made him feel secure in my loyalty. He practically packed my bags for me, reminding me to get him a cheesesteak. The drive to Philadelphia was 4 hours of white-knuckled tension. I had wrapped each painting in bubble wrap and old towels, placing them in a nondescript suitcase in my trunk. Every police car I saw in my rearview mirror sent a jolt of panic through my chest. It was absurd. They were my paintings. But I felt like a thief, a smuggler of my own life. The financial advisor I found wasn't a stuffy man in a three-piece suit. Her name was Anya Sharma, and her office was small, clean, and overlooked a bustling street. She was young, sharp, and didn't look at me like I was a fragile antique. She looked at me like a client. I didn't tell her the whole story. I told her I was restructuring my personal assets for a passion project. It was a lie that was fundamentally true. She handled the paintings with a reverence that shamed me. She brought in a specialist, a quiet man who smelled of old paper and linseed oil. He examined them under a magnifying lamp, humming to himself. I waited in Anya's office, sipping a cup of tea that I couldn't taste, my stomach a knot of grief and anticipation. The specialist's valuation was more than I had dared to hope. My mother had better taste than any of us knew. Anya handled the private sale with ruthless efficiency. Within 48 hours the money was mine. She helped me open a new bank account at a different institution, an account that Richard's prying eyes would never find. She advised me on how to structure it, how to keep it hidden. She never asked why a woman my age would need such secrecy. She just saw the look in my eye and did her job. Driving home with a cashier's check for a staggering amount tucked into a hidden pocket of my purse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollowed out. The hallway upstairs would now have 8 blank spaces on the wall, pale rectangles of faded wallpaper where my mother's landscapes used to hang. It was the first casualty of my war, the first piece of my own soul that I had to sacrifice. I stopped at a service plaza on the New Jersey Turnpike and bought Richard his greasy, onion-laden cheesesteak, the price of my freedom. As I handed it to him later that evening, his gratified smile was almost enough to make me choke. He had no idea he had just eaten the most expensive sandwich of his life. With the war chest secured, my next move was to find a general. I needed a lawyer. My first attempt was a lesson in humiliation. I chose a respectable firm downtown, the kind with a name made of 3 other names, polished mahogany, and portraits of stern-faced founders on the walls. Mr. Abernathy was a man in his late 60s just like me, but we might as well have been different species. He had soft, manicured hands and a voice that oozed a kind of syrupy, patronizing sympathy. I sat across his vast desk and told him the story. I kept my voice even, presenting the facts as I knew them. The decade-long affair, the financial control, the whispers of having me declared incompetent. I spoke of the tablet, the calendar entries, the messages. He listened, nodding slowly, a placid smile on his face. When I finished, he leaned forward and placed one of his soft hands over mine, which were clasped tightly on my purse. "Alice," he said, calling me by my first name as if we were old friends. "I understand you're going through a very emotional time. These situations, they can be incredibly painful. It's not uncommon for a woman in your position to feel overwhelmed, to perhaps see things in the most dramatic light." My blood ran cold. He wasn't listening. He was diagnosing. "It's not drama, Mr. Abernathy. It's a conspiracy." He chuckled, a soft, wheezing sound. "That's a very strong word. What I suggest is a quiet, dignified settlement. Richard is a respected man in this community. A public, messy divorce would be devastating for everyone's reputation. We approach his lawyer, we negotiate a fair spousal support package, divide the assets amicably. You can move on with your head held high. He didn't understand. Or he didn't want to. He saw a hysterical old woman, not a clear-eyed victim of a long-term plot. He saw a domestic squabble, not a criminal conspiracy. He was offering me a bandage for a mortal wound. I wasn't after a fair settlement. I wasn't after money. I was after obliteration. I was after justice, scorched earth and absolute. I pulled my hand from under his. "Thank you for your time," I said, my voice clipped. I stood up, my back ramrod straight. "I'm afraid you and I have a fundamental disagreement on the definition of justice." I walked out of that mahogany-scented office, the scent of defeat and condescension clinging to me. For a moment, sitting in my car, I felt a wave of despair. What if he was right? What if everyone would see me this way? An emotional, elderly woman, imagining plots and conspiracies. This was their greatest weapon. My age, my gender, the quiet life I had led. They could use my very identity to discredit me. But then the despair hardened into something else. Rage. A cold, clear rage that burned away the doubt. I didn't drive home. I drove to the public library, sat down at a computer and started searching. I didn't look for top divorce lawyers. I searched for terms like ruthless litigator, scorched earth tactics, high conflict divorce. One name kept coming up. Evelyn Reed. The articles about her were terrifying and thrilling. She was described as a shark, a bulldog, a nightmare for opposing counsel. Her picture showed a woman in her late 40s with severe dark hair, eyes that seemed to see right through the camera, and a mouth that looked like it had never formed a sentimental word in its life. She was exactly what I needed. Her office was the polar opposite of Abernathy's. It was in a modern steel and glass building. No mahogany, no oil paintings. Just stark white walls, minimalist furniture, and a panoramic view of the city that seemed to put the world at her feet. Evelyn Reed did not offer me tea. She didn't smile. She just pointed to a chair and said, "You have 1 hour. Begin." I told her the same story I told Abernathy. But this time I didn't just tell it. I presented it. I laid it out like a prosecutor, fact by fact. I was calm. I was precise. I left out the emotion. Throughout my entire recitation, her expression never changed. It was a mask of neutral, professional skepticism. I could feel her weighing my words, searching for the cracks of hysteria, for the telltale signs of the scorned wife Abernathy had seen. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. "You have proof of the affair on this tablet?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes. A decade of it." "Financial records? You have access to them." "Limited. But I know where they are." She nodded slowly, her eyes still unreadable. "Mrs. Miller, an affair, even a long one, is a tragedy. It is not, in the eyes of the law in this state, a particularly powerful tool in a divorce settlement. It's a no-fault state. His cruelty, his financial control, that helps. But what you're describing, a plot to have you declared incompetent, that's a very serious allegation. And without concrete proof, it's just your word against his. And he, as you've said, is a very respected man. It was the same wall, just built with colder, harder bricks. My heart sank. She was going to dismiss me too. I reached into my purse. My hand was shaking now. I pulled out the small, discreet digital voice recorder. I placed it on the glass desk between us. "I have one more thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I put this in the living room. It was on for 3 hours last Thursday evening." I pressed play. The recording was horribly clear. The clinking of ice in glasses, the low murmur of the television, and then their voices. Richard's low and confident, Clara's sharp and conspiratorial. I watched Evelyn's face as my husband and my sister discussed my increasing forgetfulness, the slips I'd been having. I watched as they talked about Dr. Albright, and how he was sympathetic to Richard's concerns. I watched as Clara suggested they start a journal to document my episodes. And then came the part that had made my blood freeze in my veins. Richard's voice. The inheritance from her mother is tied up in a trust that I can't touch as long as she's of sound mind. But if the court appoints me as her conservator, Clara's voice, then you're not just managing her affairs, you're protecting her. Protecting her from herself. It's the loving thing to do, Ricky. It's a gentle push to get her the care she so clearly needs. I hit stop. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. I risked a look at Evelyn Reed. The mask was gone. Her skepticism had evaporated, replaced by something that looked like polished granite. Her eyes were chips of ice. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, and for the first time, it held a trace of something other than professional detachment. It was a cold, controlled fury. They aren't just adulterers, Mrs. Miller, she said slowly, her gaze fixed on the small recorder as if it were a venomous snake. They are conspirators. She looked up at me and her eyes met mine. And we will treat them as such. Our goal is no longer a divorce settlement. Our goal is annihilation. In that sterile glass-walled office high above the city, I had finally found my general. The war had officially begun. The hardest part wasn't the secret meetings with Evelyn, the clandestine gathering of documents, or the constant fear of discovery. The hardest part began every morning when I woke up in the bed I had shared with Richard for 45 years, and it ended every night when I pretended to fall asleep beside him. The hardest part was the daily performance. My life became a stage play, and I was the lead actress in a role I despised. I had to be Alice Miller, the doting wife, the loving sister, the slightly dotty, gently aging matriarch. Every word, every gesture was a lie. When Richard came home from work and I asked about his day, the question felt like ash in my mouth. He would drone on about his business, the real estate deals, the community board meetings, the life of the man he pretended to be. And I would nod and smile, all the while picturing him with my sister, hearing their whispered treachery on a loop in my mind. Clara was worse. She was over at the house constantly, ostensibly to help plan Miller Fest. She would arrive with fabric swatches for tablecloths and binders full of catering menus, her voice a constant chirping stream of false affection. "Oh, Alice, don't you worry your pretty little head about this. It's too much for you. Let me handle the stressful parts." She would pat my hand, the same hand that had held my husband's, and I would have to fight the primal urge to snatch it away. Every act of her feigned kindness felt like swallowing acid. I'd have to retreat to the bathroom and grip the sink, my knuckles white, staring at my reflection and reminding myself of the goal. Annihilation. I had to help her choose a caterer for the party that would be their public execution. We tasted miniature quiches and debated the merits of a champagne fountain. "It has to be perfect for you and Richard," she'd said, her eyes gleaming with a sincerity that was more monstrous than any open hatred. And I agreed. "Yes, Clara. It has to be perfect." But the true agony, the conflict that gnawed at my soul in the quiet hours of the night, was the collateral damage. My son Mark was so full of joy about this project. He was blissfully unaware that his passion, his Miller Fest, was being weaponized. He would show me his camera placement diagrams, excitedly explaining the concept of a jib shot. He'd ask for my opinion on the introductory music. "Something classy, Mom, you know? To honor you and Dad." Each enthusiastic word was a small knife in my heart. He was a good boy. A good man. He had built his own life, but he still loved the family he thought we were. He revered his father. He adored his Aunt Clara. My plan, my necessary righteous plan, would not just expose them. It would shatter his world. It would incinerate the very foundations of his identity. He would learn that his entire life, his family, was a carefully constructed lie. How does a person recover from that? And then there was Lily, my granddaughter. She was 6 years old, a whirlwind of bright pink dresses and scraped knees. She was the one pure, untainted thing in this whole rotten mess. When she would crawl into my lap to show me a drawing of our family, a smiling son hovering over stick figures of me, Grandpa, Auntie Clara, and her daddy, the guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. In her crayon drawing, we were all holding hands. Soon I would be the one to rip those hands apart forever. This was my deepest, most agonizing conflict. To save myself, I had to destroy the family I had spent my life building. To claim my own future, I had to poison my own son's past. Was my freedom worth his pain? Was my justice worth Lily's innocence? Some nights I would lie awake, the sheer monstrosity of it all threatening to drown me. I could just stop. I could take the money from the paintings and disappear. Leave them to their sordid little lives, to their eventual quiet betrayal. It would be the easier path. The kinder path for Mark and Lily. But then I would hear their voices from the recorder in my memory. A gentle push. The loving thing to do. They weren't just stealing my money. They were trying to steal my mind, my identity, myself. They were planning to erase me, to turn me into a non-person, a ward of the state with my own husband as my jailer. And they were going to do it with a smile, under the guise of love and concern. And I knew I couldn't walk away. This wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who had ever been called emotional, or forgetful, or unstable. It was for every person whose reality had been twisted by the people they trusted most. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. And if my family was the price, then it was a price I would have to pay. I would mourn them. I would mourn the idea of them I had loved for so long. But I would pay it. I would look at Lily's innocent drawing, and I would harden my heart. I was doing this so that one day, she would know that her grandmother was not a victim. She was a survivor. And sometimes survival looks a lot like destruction. That I became the perfect frail matriarch they wanted me to be. The transformation was subtle. A slow fade into the person they had been trying to convince me I was for years. My steps became a little slower, my hands trembled just so when I reached for a glass of water. It was a performance, and my audience of two was completely captivated. They saw what they wanted to see. A woman worn down by age and time, a vessel ready to be emptied. The week after I found the recording, I began laying the groundwork. It started in the kitchen, the heart of the home I had built. Now the stage for my quiet rebellion. I was holding a grocery list, squinting at my own handwriting. Richard walked in, smelling of expensive aftershave and deceit. "Everything all right, dear?" he asked, his voice dripping with the false concern that had become the soundtrack to my life. I looked up, letting my face fall into a mask of confused frustration. "Oh, Richard, I can't seem to make this out. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Could you?" I let the sentence hang, a fragile thread in the air. He took the list, his fingers brushing mine. A jolt of revulsion went through me, but I didn't let it show. "Of course, Alice. Looks like you need more olive oil." He smiled, a condescending, placating smile that made my blood run cold. He thought he was managing me. Later that day, Clara came over, ostensibly to help with preparations for the 4th of July reunion. This was Mark's big idea. A live-streamed family gathering. At first, the thought had filled me with dread. Another public performance of a life that was a lie. But now I saw it for what it was, a stage. A gift. Clara bustled into the living room, all false energy and saccharine smiles. "Alice, darling, I've been thinking about the guest list for the party. We should probably go over it." This was my moment. I pressed a hand to my temple, a gesture I had practiced in the mirror until it looked natural, a gesture of weary resignation. "Oh, Clara, thank you for thinking of it. To be honest, it's all a bit much for me right now. My head just feels so cluttered. Would you mind terribly managing it? You're so much better at these things anyway. My eyes aren't so good anymore." The look that passed between her and Richard was electric. It was a flicker of pure, undiluted triumph. They thought I was surrendering, handing over the reins of my own life, piece by piece. Clara's expression softened into one of pity, a cruel and calculated performance of compassion. "Of course, Alice. Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing," she cooed, patting my hand. "You just rest. I'll take care of everything." They exchanged triumphant, condescending glances over my head, so sure of their victory. They believed they were guiding a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea I was the one holding the knife. Every interaction became a data point. Every feigned moment of forgetfulness, Every time I misplaced my reading glasses only for Clara to find them right in front of me. Every sigh of manufactured fatigue was a brushstroke in the portrait of the woman they needed me to be. And while they were busy admiring their handiwork, I was documenting everything. My phone became an extension of my will. After they left a room, I would quickly type notes, capturing the exact phrasing of their condescending remarks, the date, the time. Richard explained how the television remote works for the third time this week. Clara suggested I label the spice jars with larger print. I used a voice recording app, letting it run in my apron pocket during their visits. The audio files were a library of their soft, insidious cruelty, their gentle attempts to sand away the edges of my sanity. They thought they were winning. They were, in fact, writing their own indictment, one patronizing word at a time. While they planned a party, I built a case. The day after I'd handed Clara the guest list, I drove to a part of the city I rarely visited. Evelyn Reed's law office was in a sleek, modern building that felt a world away from my gilded cage in Maple Creek. The space was minimalist and sharp, all glass and steel, much like the woman herself. She was in her late 40s with a gaze that didn't just see you, it analyzed you. The lawyer who had dismissed me had seen a confused old woman. I could tell Evelyn saw something else entirely. I didn't begin with tears. I began with facts. I placed the small digital recorder on her polished mahogany desk. "Before I say anything else," I said, my voice steady, "I need you to listen to this." I pressed play. The sound of my husband's and my sister's voices filled the silent office, their conspiratorial whispers weaving a tapestry of betrayal. I watched Evelyn's face. There was no shock, no pity. Her expression hardened, her focus intensifying. When the recording finished with Clara's chilling line about a gentle push towards incompetence, Evelyn leaned back in her chair. She didn't offer condolences. She offered a strategy. "This is not a divorce case, Mrs. Miller. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud. The emotional distress is a component, but the core is financial. We need to build a fortress of evidence so impenetrable that by the time you're done, they won't have a stone to stand on." Her words were like a balm to a wound I didn't know was still bleeding. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a victim. I was a client. I was a plaintiff. With her guidance, my quiet documentation transformed into a full-scale intelligence operation. The first call was to a private investigator Evelyn recommended, a woman named Maria. We met in a sterile coffee shop halfway between my town and the city. Maria was unassuming, the kind of person you'd never look at twice, which was, I suppose, the point. I gave her the names, the dates from the tablet, and a photograph of Richard and Clara at last year's Christmas party, smiling for the camera, their hands just out of frame, likely intertwined. "I don't need to know what they're doing," I told her, my voice low. "I already know that. I need to know where. I need proof that is concrete and undeniable." While Maria worked in the shadows, I worked in the dust of my own past. Richard had always handled the finances, a benevolent-sounding term for absolute control. But he had made one mistake. The inheritance from my parents, including the house and my mother's art collection, had been placed in a trust under my name long before I ever met him. He couldn't touch the principal, but he had managed the accounts for so long, I believe he'd forgotten I still had access. Late at night, when the house was still and Richard's snores were a rhythmic reminder of the man I once thought I knew, I would go to my late father's study. I turned on the old green banker's lamp, its glow illuminating a past I now had to weaponize. I logged into accounts that had been dormant for years, and there it was, a decade of financial leakage. It started small. Transfers to Clara labeled loan kitchen remodel, then loan car trouble. The loans grew in size and frequency, but there were never any corresponding repayments. It was a slow, steady siphoning of my inheritance, disguised as familial support. Richard was the facilitator, approving the transfers from the trust's expense account, his digital signature on every transaction. He wasn't just enabling her. He was co-signing the theft. I spent hours printing statements highlighting each transfer, the paper stacking up on the desk like sheets of ice. A week later, Maria delivered. An unmarked manila envelope was left in my mailbox. Inside were photographs, Not the sordid, grainy pictures of a cheap motel I had expected. These were worse. They were of Richard and Clara outside a charming upscale apartment building in the city. Richard was holding the key. Clara was laughing, her head thrown back in a way I hadn't seen in years. There were photos of them carrying in groceries a bottle of wine. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a life. A life on my money. The private investigator's report included a copy of the lease agreement for apartment 4B, signed by Richard Miller, the rent paid monthly from a bank account I'd never heard of. My hands didn't shake as I held the photos. I felt a profound, chilling calm. The pain had already scoured me clean, leaving behind only purpose. Each piece of evidence was scanned, digitized, and uploaded. I created a folder on a secure cloud service, the one Evelyn had set up for me. I labeled it simply, The Unveiling. Inside, subfolders bloomed: financials, photographs, audio. I dragged and dropped the files, each one a nail in the coffin of my old life. The bank statements showing decade-long transfers of loans to my sister. The lease agreement for their love nest. The timestamped screenshots from Richard's tablet. The audio files of their whispers and plots. It was a digital guillotine, and I was sharpening the blade with every click of the mouse. The process was methodical, almost sacred. I was no longer a victim of their story. I was the meticulous, unsparing author of its ending. The plan for exposure was solid, but Evelyn had impressed upon me a crucial truth. Justice was not the same as freedom. Vindicating myself in Maple Creek was one thing, but living among the ashes of the life I was about to burn down was another. I wasn't just planning a revelation. I was planning an escape. 2 weeks before the 4th of July, I told Richard the first was going to visit an old college roommate in Oregon. A woman named Sarah, who, conveniently for me, had passed away 3 years ago. It was a lie Richard would never think to question. Why would he? In his mind, I was a creature of habit and home, a ghost already haunting the halls of my own house. The idea of me taking a spontaneous cross-country trip was so out of character for the woman he thought I was that it was the perfect cover. He was almost enthusiastic. What a wonderful idea, Alice. You deserve a break. Get some fresh air. He was thinking it would be good for me to be out of the way while he and Clara finalized their party plans, their reunion. I could see the relief in his eyes. The flight to Portland was the first time I had been truly alone in years. As the plane climbed, I watched my life shrink below me, the neat little houses and manicured lawns of my world turning into an abstract grid. A sense of detachment washed over me. The woman down there, Alice Miller, the wife, the sister, the matriarch, she wasn't me anymore. She was a role I was about to shed. Portland was gray and damp, the air smelling of rain and pine. It felt clean, real. I wasn't there as a tourist. I had a purpose. I had an appointment with a real estate agent, a brisk, efficient woman who showed me 3 small apartments in 2 hours. I chose the last one. It was on the top floor of a quiet building in the Northwest District, with a large window in the living room that looked out over the city towards the sea on a clear day. It was small, just a bedroom, a living area, and a small kitchen. It was empty, a blank canvas. It was perfect. "I'll take it," I said, my voice not wavering. I signed the lease with a pen from my purse, my signature firm and clear. Alice Miller. It felt like the first document I had signed as myself in a very long time. My next stop was a local branch of a national bank. I walked in, took a number, and waited. When I sat down with the young bank manager, I explained I was relocating and wanted to open a new set of accounts. I used the money from the sale of my mother's paintings, a transaction I had conducted with a discreet New York auction house weeks ago, the only major asset Richard had no knowledge of or control over. I transferred the funds, set up a checking and a savings account, and walked out with a new debit card in my wallet. It was a simple piece of plastic, but it felt like a key to a life that was mine and mine alone. The final piece of logistics was the most painful. Back in my hotel room, I made a call to a moving company Evelyn had vetted. I arranged for a small truck to arrive at my Maple Creek house on the morning of July 5th. I gave them a precise list. Not the furniture, not the expensive china, not the life Richard and I had built. I wanted the 2 boxes in the attic that held my old college textbooks and my half-finished paintings. I wanted my mother's rocking chair. I wanted the small chest of letters my father had written me. I wanted the pieces of the woman I was before I became Mrs. Richard Miller. The movers were instructed to be discreet, to collect only what was on the list, and to take it to a storage unit I had rented under my name in Portland. Flying home, I felt a strange duality. I was Alice, the woman returning from a restful trip to see an old friend. And I was Alice, the general returning to the front lines on the eve of a great battle. When I walked through the door, Richard greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a spider's touch. "Welcome home, dear. Did you have a nice time?" "It was lovely," I said, allowing a weary but contented smile to grace my lips. "But it's good to be home." The lie felt as natural as breathing. I walked through the rooms of my house, a stranger in a familiar land. The walls seemed to hum with the ghosts of 45 years of memories, some cherished, most now tainted. I was not just escaping a marriage. I was escaping a museum of my own making, a place where I had allowed myself to become one of the exhibits. That night, as I lay in bed next to the man who had stolen my life, I felt no fear. I felt no anger. I felt only the immense, silent, gathering power of the coming storm. The countdown had begun. They were planning a party. I was planning a reckoning. The 4th of July sun was relentless, beating down on the perfectly manicured lawn of the life Richard and I had built. It was a lie, of course, but it was a beautiful one. Red, white, and blue streamers twisted in the gentle breeze, and the smell of freshly cut grass mingled with the charcoal and lighter fluid scent of the grill. Laughter, tinny and distant, floated from the pool where my grandchildren splashed. It was the perfect picture of the American dream, a scene Mark had meticulously curated for his online audience. His cameras, 3 of them on tripods, were strategically placed to capture every angle of manufactured joy. On the far side of the patio, a large projector screen, usually reserved for movie nights, was displaying the live stream feed from Mark's popular Modern Family channel. A column on the right side of the screen showed the chat, a waterfall of heart emojis and well wishes from thousands of strangers who thought they knew us. I held a glass of iced tea, the condensation cold against my palm. The ice cubes clinked softly, a steady rhythmic sound that anchored me in the moment. I watched Richard work the crowd, his arm draped around my sister Clara's shoulders in a way that looked perfectly familiar to the uninitiated. To me it was a brand. His hand rested just a little too low on her back, his thumb drawing lazy circles I could see even from across the lawn. Clara leaned into him, her head tilted, laughing at something he'd whispered. Her smile was predatory. They were so comfortable, so brazen in their deception. They thought I was a ghost in my own home, a piece of antique furniture to be dusted off for special occasions. They had no idea the furniture was about to bring the whole house down. Mark, my earnest, well-meaning son, tapped the microphone that was set up near the projector. "Okay, everyone. If I could have your attention for just a minute." His voice boomed through the speakers, and the splashing from the pool subsided. "As you all know, today isn't just about celebrating our great country. It's about celebrating 2 of the greatest people I know. Mom, Dad, happy 45th anniversary." A polite, warm wave of applause rippled through the 50 or so guests. The live chat exploded with animated fireworks and hearts. I saw comments scroll by. 45 years. Goals. Such a beautiful couple. Happy anniversary, Millers. I smiled, a placid, gentle expression I had perfected over decades. It was a mask and it fit like a second skin. Richard, ever the performer, took the microphone from Mark, his other hand finding mine and giving it a squeeze. His skin was warm and dry. I felt nothing. "Thank you, son," he began, his voice rich and full of false emotion. 45 years. You know, when I first saw Alice I knew. I just knew she was the one. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. He paused, turning to look at me. His eyes were a startling blue, but they were empty. They held no love, only a sort of proprietary pride. He was proud of his acquisition. But beauty, as we know, can fade. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Clara shot him a tiny warning glare. He was going off script. "But what doesn't fade?" he continued, recovering smoothly. is a good heart, a loyal spirit. For 45 years this woman has been my rock. Through business struggles, through raising our wonderful son, through every storm life threw at us, Alice was there. She is the quiet foundation upon which this entire family is built. He gestured around the yard, at the house, at Mark and his family. Everything you see here, it's because of her. Her quiet strength, her unwavering support. She's not just a wife and a mother. She's the best friend a man could ask for. He was laying it on thick, and I could see Clara preening, as if his praise for me was a testament to their cleverness in managing me for so long. They saw me as a benevolent, slightly dotty old woman, the gentle matriarch who was blissfully unaware. They had spent years carefully curating that image, both for the public and for me. And of course, Richard added, turning his gaze toward Clara, we couldn't have done any of this without my wonderful sister-in-law, my other best friend, Clara. He winked at her. When Alice's health started to become more of a challenge, Clara stepped in. She's been a godsend, helping to manage the household, helping me take care of my Alice. It takes a village, they say, and I'm just so blessed to have the best one. He leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. It felt like a spider crawling on my skin. The crowd cooed. The chat went wild. So sweet. What a good husband. He handed the microphone back to Mark, who was wiping a tear from his eye. My poor foolish son. The pain this would cause him was the only thing that gave me pause. But the rot had to be cut out, no matter how much healthy flesh was lost in the process. Mom. Mark's voice was soft. Would you like to say anything? All eyes turned to me. I saw pity in some, fond tolerance in others. Richard and Clara shared a look. A quick, tight smile that said, let's get this over with. They expected a few frail, mumbled words of thanks. They expected me to play my part. I placed my iced tea on a nearby table, the glass making a firm, definitive clink. I rose from my chair. My knees didn't creak. My back was straight. I walked to the microphone, my hand steady as I took it from my son. I could feel the weight of it, cool and solid. This was my weapon. For years, their words had been their weapons against me. Now my voice would be mine. I looked out at the familiar faces. Friends we'd known for decades. Neighbors. My own family. Then I looked at the little red light on Mark's main camera. Beyond that lens were thousands of people, an invisible jury. Thank you, Richard. That was a beautiful speech. I began, my voice clear and strong, without the slightest tremor they'd grown so accustomed to. I saw a flicker of surprise in Richard's eyes. He's right. 45 years is a long time. It's a lifetime. Long enough to build a family, a home, a legacy. I paused, letting the words hang in the warm air. I also want to talk about family, I continued, my voice dropping just a little, gaining an edge of steel. I want to talk about loyalty and trust and the quiet foundations he mentioned. But I also want to talk about the secrets that are buried under that foundation. The kind of secrets that can rot a family from the inside out, until the whole beautiful structure is ready to collapse at the slightest touch. A nervous silence fell over the yard. The only sound was the hum of the pool filter and the distant pop of a firecracker down the street. The live chat slowed, the hearts replaced by confused emojis. Richard's smile was frozen on his face, a rictus of apprehension. Clara had gone utterly still, her wine glass paused halfway to her lips. In my hand, hidden from view, was a small black remote, the kind you use for a PowerPoint presentation. It was my detonator. People think they know us, I said, my eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on Mark, who looked bewildered. They see this. I gestured to the house, the party. They see the photos Mark posts. The Miller family. Perfect. Happy. But a picture is just a moment in time. A story is what happens between the frames. With my thumb, I pressed the first button on the remote. The projector screen flickered. The image of the live stream vanished. For a second, it was just a blank white light, making everyone blink. Then an image resolved itself. It wasn't from our family slideshow. It was a beach. A breathtakingly beautiful beach with water so turquoise it looked unreal. In the center of the frame were two people, locked in a passionate kiss. A man and a woman. The man was Richard. The woman was Clara. It was an intimate, unguarded moment. Her hands were tangled in his hair. His were firmly on her waist, pulling her against him. They were not acting like a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. They were acting like lovers who thought they were alone, 1,000 miles from home. In the bottom right corner of the high-resolution photo was a digital date stamp. It was from 3 years ago, during the week Richard had supposedly been at a business conference in Cancun. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a soft, sharp intake of breath from 50 people at once, a sound like the tide being sucked out to sea, leaving a dead, exposed silence in its wake. Someone dropped a glass, and the smash echoed unnaturally in the quiet. I turned my head slightly to watch the fallout. Mark had frozen completely. His eyes were wide, fixed on the screen. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the denial warring with the undeniable proof in front of him. His face, which had been beaming with pride moments before, was slowly crumbling into a mask of horror and dawning comprehension. He looked from the giant image of his father's betrayal to the real-life man standing 5 feet away, and then to his Aunt Clara, whose face had gone a chalky white. The live stream chat, which I could still see on Mark's laptop screen near the camera, had erupted. The slow cascade of emojis had become a frantic, unreadable blur of question marks, shocked faces and comments scrolling too fast to read. The public execution had begun. Richard looked like he'd been shot. All the color drained from his face, leaving his summer tan looking sallow and fake. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated panic. The mask was gone. For the first time in years I saw the real him. A weak, cornered man. Clara was different. After the initial shock, her expression hardened. A flicker of pure hatred flashed in her eyes. It was aimed directly at me. The concerned sister was gone, replaced by the bitter, exposed accomplice. I gave them no time to recover. No time to formulate a lie, to try and spin this as a misunderstanding. I kept my eyes on the audience, on the camera. A picture is worth 1,000 words, they say. My voice cut through the stunned silence, calm and measured. That one, for example, tells a story of a decade-long affair. I clicked the remote again. The beach photo was replaced by a new image. It was a screenshot of a bank statement. My bank statement. A transfer of $50,000 to Clara Miller. The memo line read, "Business loan artisan jewelry." Click. Another screenshot. A text message exchange between Richard and Clara, from 6 months ago. Clara. She almost found the hotel receipts. I had to create a whole story about a surprise for Mark. Richard. Be more careful. She's getting more forgetful, but she's not stupid yet. We need to be patient. Clara. I'm tired of being patient, Rich. That inheritance is just sitting there. A low murmur spread through the guests. It was a sound of disgust. People were turning to look at Clara. Their expressions of friendly sympathy now replaced with contempt. For 10 years my husband and my sister have been lovers. I announced, my voice amplifying the words on the screen. For the last 2 years they have been systematically defrauding me. Clara's struggling jewelry business that I've been so generously funding? It doesn't exist. To date, I have given her over $200,000 of my inheritance from my mother. I let that sink in. I saw my son Mark physically flinch, his hand coming up to cover his mouth. He knew how much I loved my mother, how much that inheritance meant to me. But stealing my money wasn't enough, I continued, my voice as cold as ice. They needed it all. And to get it, they needed me out of the way. Not dead. That would be too messy. They just needed me gone. Declared mentally incompetent. Richard finally found his voice. Alice. Stop this. This is a private family matter. You're not well, he blustered, taking a step toward me. Am I not? I asked, turning to face him for the first time. I held his gaze and he faltered. I have never been more well in my entire life. I have never been more clear. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. And then a sound file began to play. Their voices. Their familiar voices, filling the dead silence of the backyard. It was from the recorder I had hidden in the living room bookshelf 3 weeks ago. Richard's voice, low and conspiratorial. "Did you talk to Dr. Evans?" Clara's voice, sharp and impatient. "I did. He's willing to do an initial evaluation. I told him she's been misplacing things constantly, forgetting conversations we just had. I said I'm worried she's a danger to herself." Richard. "Good. We need a paper trail. If we can get her diagnosed with early onset dementia, get power of attorney, the trust fund my father left her becomes accessible. We can manage it on her behalf." Clara, a cruel little laugh. "Manage it right into our retirement fund. How much longer do we have to play this game, Rich? Pretending to care, pretending to be her doting sister? I'm exhausted." Richard. "Just a little longer, honey. We just need to give her a little push. A few more forgotten appointments, a few more lost keys. She'll start to believe it herself soon enough. She'll walk right into the cage we're building for her." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame and horror. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire world seemed to have stopped breathing. The only motion was the frantic, silent scrolling of the live chat on Mark's laptop. I raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice, when it came, was the only sound in the universe. "I have filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery and conspiracy to commit fraud," I announced, the legal terms falling like guillotine blades. "I have petitioned the court with the help of my lawyer, Evelyn Reed, to freeze all joint assets, effective immediately." Richard's jaw dropped. I turned my gaze to my sister. She was staring at me, her face a mask of pure, undiluted venom. "And Clara," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth, "expect to be served with a lawsuit for the $200,000 you have defrauded from me over the years. My lawyer has the complete file. Every bank statement. Every text message. Every recording. It's titled The Unveiling." I then did the final thing I had planned. I turned away from the wreckage of my family in the yard. I walked a few steps closer to the main camera, until my face filled the frame. I looked directly into the lens, at the little red light, knowing that thousands of strangers were watching this family implode. They were my witnesses. "To my family and friends here today, and to everyone watching," I said, my voice softening for just a moment with genuine regret. "I am truly sorry you had to witness this. I am sorry to have destroyed a day of celebration. But the truth, after being buried for so long, demanded an audience." I paused, and my voice hardened again, becoming as unyielding as granite. "As for Richard Miller and Clara Dane," I said, using their full names, stripping them of their titles, "you are no longer my husband. You are no longer my sister. You are strangers to me, and I want nothing from you but to never see your faces again. You are disowned." I held the gaze of the camera for 1 second longer. Then I opened my hand and let the microphone fall. It hit the stone patio with a loud percussive bang. The feedback shrieked through the speakers, a high-pitched electronic scream of agony that ripped through the afternoon quiet. It was the perfect soundtrack to their ruin. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I didn't look at Mark's shattered face or Richard's pathetic rage or Clara's silent fury. I simply turned and with a calm, steady gait I walked away. I walked past the stunned faces of my guests, through the patio doors, and into the cool, quiet house that was no longer my home. The screaming feedback was still echoing behind me as I walked out the front door, leaving the smoldering ashes of my old life behind me without a single backward glance. A car was waiting for me at the curb just as I'd arranged. My new life had already begun. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. The image was burned into my mind. Richard's face, a mask of slack-jawed disbelief, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. Clara beside him, her perfectly painted smile frozen in a rictus of horror, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. The collective, silent gasp of our friends and family, a sound more deafening than a scream. The faint, tinny echo from the speakers as the audio of their betrayal filled the manicured garden. That was enough. My feet moved before my mind had fully processed the decision to do so. One step, then another. I walked through the stunned crowd, a ghost at my own funeral. They parted for me, their bodies moving instinctively, creating a pathway through a sea of frozen expressions. No one reached out. No one spoke my name. It was as if I had become something untouchable, a force of nature that had just swept through their tidy, predictable world. I passed my son, Mark. His face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock, his eyes wide, fixed on the screen where the evidence of his father's and aunt's treachery was still displayed. There was pain there, a deep foundational crack spreading across his features, and a sliver of that pain pierced my own resolve. But I couldn't stop. To stop would be to falter, to be pulled back into the undertow of their lies. The warm, humid air of the July evening felt heavy, thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming hydrangeas, scents I used to associate with happiness, now tainted forever. I walked down the stone path, my sensible heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm against the slate. Each step was a severing, a cut thread. Behind me, I could hear the first stirrings of chaos, a frantic shout, a woman's sob, the confused babble as the live stream audience's comments likely began to cascade into reality. It was their symphony of destruction, and I had been its conductor. I didn't turn to look back at the house I had poured 45 years of my life into, polishing its floors, arranging its furniture, filling its rooms with a love that had only ever been a one-way street. It was no longer my home. It was a museum of my own foolishness, a beautifully constructed stage for a long-running tragedy. Looking back would be an act of nostalgia, and I had no room for that anymore. The black sedan was parked just beyond the gate, exactly where Evelyn said it would be. The driver, a discreet man in a simple suit, got out and opened the rear door for me without a word. He didn't look at my face. He was a professional, a cog in the machine of my liberation. As I slid onto the cool leather seat, the door closed with a solid, satisfying thud. The sound was a full stop, an end to the longest chapter of my life. The engine started, a low hum that vibrated through the seat, and the car pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent. Through the tinted window, the lights of Maple Creek blurred into streaks of gold and white. The familiar landmarks of my life, the market where I bought groceries, the library where I'd volunteered, the park where I pushed Mark on the swings, slid past, specters of a woman who no longer existed. The chaos I had unleashed was their problem now. The shattered reputations, the broken trust, the public humiliation. That was the world they had made for themselves, brick by deceitful brick. I had simply turned on the lights so everyone could see the rot in the foundations. I felt no triumph, no giddy rush of victory, just a profound, hollowed-out stillness. A quiet expanse opening up inside me where the anxiety and pain had lived for so long. The drive was long. I watched the sun rise over a different state, the sky turning from bruised purple to a hopeful pale pink. It was the first sunrise in a decade that I hadn't woken up with a knot of dread in my stomach. A few days later, in a sterile but peaceful motel room hundreds of miles away, my lawyer, Evelyn, called. "It's done, Alice," she said, her voice crisp and professional, but with an undercurrent of what sounded like awe. "You're a viral sensation. They're calling it the Maple Creek Meltdown." I didn't ask for details, but she gave them to me anyway. The live stream had not been cut off in time. Millions had watched. News outlets had picked it up. My carefully curated file, the unveiling, had been anonymously leaked to a few key journalists, just as we'd planned. Richard's carefully constructed image as a community pillar, a family man, had been atomized in real time. His real estate business, built on handshakes and a reputation for integrity, collapsed within a week. Partners pulled out, clients vanished, the bank called in loans he couldn't cover. He was ruined not just financially but socially. He became a pariah in the town that had once revered him. And Clara, oh Clara, her life, a performance of piety and sisterly concern, was exposed as a grotesque lie. The women in her book club, her church group, the mothers at her daughter's school, they shunned her. She was the woman who had betrayed her own sister, plotted to steal from her, and carried on a sordid affair for 10 years under her own roof. She was forced to sell her house, the one I had helped her secure the down payment for, and moved to a town where no one knew her name. But the internet has a long memory. Her name would always be linked to the meltdown. The most painful consequence was Mark. Evelyn told me he hadn't spoken to Richard or Clara since that night. He had walked away from the party, gotten in his car, and simply left. For weeks I heard nothing. My emails went unanswered. My heart ached with a unique kind of grief, the fear that in saving myself I had lost my son. Then one morning an email appeared. The sender, Mark Miller. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. It was short, stilted, full of pain and confusion. He wasn't congratulating me. He wasn't condemning me either. He was just trying to understand. He wrote, "I watched the whole video again. The one from the tablet. I heard what they said. I don't know who they are anymore, Mom. I don't know who I am." That was the beginning. Now he emails me once a month. The correspondence is still strained. A tightrope walk over a chasm of shared trauma. We don't talk about that night directly. We talk about the weather in Portland, the book he's reading, the funny thing his daughter said. It's fragile, but it's real. It's a start. In his last email, he ended with a single line that felt like a dam breaking. "I see now why you had to do it. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I live in Portland now. My apartment is small. Just 2 rooms with a view of the gray, moody Pacific. The furniture is secondhand, the rugs are plain, but every single item in it is mine. Chosen by me. Paid for by me. There are no ghosts here. No echoes of false laughter or whispered betrayals. The air smells of salt and turpentine. I spend my mornings painting. In a corner of the living room, an easel stands, often holding an unfinished canvas. I paint the ocean, its churning grays, its fleeting blues, the brilliant, defiant white of the foam crashing against the rocks. It's something I gave up 45 years ago, a passion I folded up and put away to make room for Richard's ambitions, for Clara's needs, for my role as the supportive, invisible woman holding their worlds together. The pain of what they did, the sheer depth of their decade-long deception, never truly disappears. It's a part of my story now, a phantom limb that aches when the weather changes. Some nights I still wake up from a dream where I am back in that house, listening at the door, my heart pounding with the fear of what I might hear. But the feeling no longer defines me. It's a scar, not a gaping wound. They thought they were taking everything from me. My home, my financial security, my sanity, my very identity. But in their cruel, calculated plan to erase me, they made a fatal error. All they really took were my chains. They stripped away the suffocating roles of wife and sister, titles I had worn like a lead-lined coat. And in the empty space left behind, they left me with the only thing that was ever truly mine. Myself. And for the first time in my life, that is enough.